The regular meeting of the Minneapolis Police Conduct Oversight Commission Audit Subcommittee will now begin.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the regular meeting of the Police Conduct Oversight Commission Audit Subcommittee for February 28th, 2022. I am Robert Jackson Pino, the chair of this subcommittee. As we begin, I'll note for the record that this meeting has remote participation by members and city staff as authorized under Minnesota Statute Section 13D. .021 due to the declared local public health emergency. This meeting will be recorded and posted to the city's website and YouTube channel as a means of increasing public access and transparency. This meeting is public and subject to the Minnesota open meeting law. At this time, I will ask the clerk to call the roll so we can verify a quorum for this meeting.
Commissioner Crockett. Commissioner Sparks.
Present.
Chair Pino.
Present.
There are 2 members present.
Let the record reflect that we have a quorum for this subcommittee. Next, we'll proceed to our agenda, a copy of which has been posted for public access to the city's legislative information management system, which is available at lims.minneapolismn.gov. The first motion is the adoption of this agenda and the acceptance of the minutes from meeting January 24th, 2022. May I have a motion to adopt the agenda and accept the January minutes?
It's Commissioner Sparks. I will make the motion.
All right. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Commissioner Crockett. Commissioner Sparks.
Aye.
Chair Pino.
Aye.
There are 2 ayes.
That motion carries. The agenda is adopted and the January minutes are accepted. The next order of business is the acceptance of public comment. I'll open the floor and invite comments from the community. We will limit the public comment period to no more than 2 minutes per speaker. And with that, are there any community members who are on the line who wish to address our subcommittee? Please remember to dial *6 to unmute yourself.
Hello, this is Dave Bicking. Yes, I wanted to comment about the no-knock warrant situation, of course, which led to fatal consequences back on February 2nd. At your last PCOC meeting, which was held about a week after that, I commented about how the PCOC had started working on that with a presentation from Knock First Minnesota back in April of 2021, and that it had been referred to the Audit Committee. And basically, it has been referred to the next meeting or tabled or continued pretty much every month after that, as the city has, it seems to have just simply stalled you on getting the data that you need to do anything with this, and generally been uncooperative on that. Want to follow up here because on February 14th, I received a message from the Minneapolis Civil Rights Department regarding an OPCR special review of no-knock warrants. I hope everybody else on the everybody on the PCOC received this statement from the Minneapolis Civil Rights Department. If not, I'd be happy to forward it to you. I found it infuriating. You know, they basically sympathized with the death of Amir Locke and, you know, the standard sort of thing like that. And they said that they are beginning to have discussions with the Civil Rights Department staff about potential actions. And here I quote, it says, "I asked our Office of Police Conduct Review staff to conduct a special review of the city's no-knock policy, granting them the authority to request unrestricted access to the records of the MPD for that purpose." And then they go on and say that they're going to come up with recommendations, identifying and recommending specific changes and improvements to department policy and procedures. What is so hypocritical about this is the Civil Rights Department and the OPCR put out this statement. Nowhere in that statement is the PCOC mentioned in terms of its role in formulating policy and working with the community. And there is no recognition that the PCOC had started that work back last April. That is a tremendous oversight and really is a slap in the face to the PCOC and its role. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bicking. Are there any other members of the community who would wish to address the commission or the subcommittee of the commission? All right, well, I want to thank Mr. Bicking for his comments today. And with that, we'll move on to item 5 on our agenda, the Transgender Hate Crime Reporting Update by Cassidy Gardner of the Civil Rights Department. She's going to be giving us an update on that ongoing evaluation.
Good afternoon, Chair Pino and Commissioner Sparks. My name is Cassidy Gardner. I'm the Director of the Civil Rights Equity Division, and I'm here to just briefly talk about the Trans Equity project that the study that was referred to staff back in 2020. I don't have any special PowerPoint or anything like that. In the transition with civil rights directors, et cetera, we've had a number of people working on this project. And so here are the major updates. So as of right now, the proposed, the way that we had proposed and structured the report is not doable. And the reason why that is because the way that the city's data collection tools, Practice Manager, and the way that police reports are categorized, there's no way to simply sort by keywords, if you will, is the easiest way to do it. There is no way to sort by gender, by type of crime. Type of crime, yes, but we would then have to go through each of the categories in which moving from a misdemeanor to a felony because of a hate crime designation, it's just not doable with staff time. And so we've developed a set of recommendations that we think moving forward that the PCOC as a larger committee can undertake, or that are just general recommendations in terms of things that could be done that would alleviate this issue in the future. So first, the first recommendation is that we support the requests of the Office of Police Conduct Review and Internal Audit for better software and better data management so that reports can indeed be sorted by either keyword or categories related to the complainant or the victim of crimes. And the second is taking a more in-depth look at the annual in-service training. Issues around gender and gender reporting are part of a rotation. We didn't go into details about what exactly needs to be updated in a training or if the training is sufficient. But knowing that there are a lot of terms within filing, whether it's with the BCA, the FBI, whether it's our forms internally with the Office of Police Conduct Review and IA, it's very clear how easy it would be for an officer to assume gender, sexual orientation, and mix those things up. And so there are just some basic, I think, basic components that the training can yield that would remind officers on how to assess those situations, how to appropriately ask for more information, because identifying victims is done on, like, the policy is to do that by appearance. That is not always going to be the case. And if gender is misgendered or misreported, that can then lead to the wrong type of what bias it would be, whether it was a hate crime based on gender or whether it was based on sexual orientation. And so things can get messy that way. So those are the two major recommendations that we have just based off of not being able to really assess if there has been an underreporting or if we are in compliance with the state statute. Based on what we do have access to, the city and the MPD are in compliance based on what data exists easily to look at. And for that, I'll stand for questions.
Perfect. Thank you. Before we recognize questions, I do see that Commissioner Crockett has joined us. Madam Clerk, are we obligated to, call roll again, or can we just recognize that Jordan Crockett's here?
If he could verbally confirm that he is here, that's all that's necessary.
Hey everyone, Jordan Crockett is here.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Crockett. And with that in mind, I will be the first one to ask questions. I think myself and Chair Sarah are the only two that were commissioners at the time when this first came to us. And I think it was my first and only in-person PCOC meeting that I've ever had, was when this group came and brought the concern to our attention, just to, make sure everybody's aware of it. This was, as Ms. Gardner said, brought to our attention because there was anecdotal evidence from community stakeholders of the transgender community that were saying there are a number of gender identity hate crimes that are being told amongst their peers, and infrequently, but they have stories that these were being told to law enforcement. Yet we had, and I think I'm remembering this correctly, correct me if I'm not, 0 reported cases of hate crimes from the perspective of gender identity hate crimes. And that was concerning, that we were having these stories and there were no reports to back that up, which is what prompted us to have this referral to the audit subcommittee, the structure of which was centered around the idea of what is our record keeping process in terms of these, maintaining and the initial recording of these reports. And then from what I'm hearing back from you, that basically the data is there, it's just structured poorly enough that it is unreasonable for us to be able to pull any meaningful information out of that data. Is that what I'm getting in that first of 2 recommendations?
That is correct.
Okay. It is unfortunate that that's the case, but it is, I'm not surprised. It seems to be an overarching trend that data governance is a huge concern, not just on this topic, but on others. So I thank you for the work that you've been putting into this. And I know that this has not been, an easy, almost 2 years now with this topic. But, if we can pull even just these 2 recommendations from it, I appreciate the work that you've put into it. They seem fairly straightforward to me. So the one thing that I do want to just make sure that I'm understanding correctly, you're talking about in-service training. And I assume that's some of the initial training that officers get. Or is that throughout the process or reoccurring trainings to make sure that they're brushed up as well?
The way that I understand it, Chair, is that for in-service training, it's an annual requirement, but the topics vary. Obviously, there's a breadth of information and changes that might occur on policies or procedures, and that they try to incorporate topics of diversity in that schedule. I don't know how frequently or how often, but I would assume that knowing everything that folks have requested be used in in-service trainings, that there's just not enough hours to touch on everything every time. And so
Mhm.
this would be one that would warrant further investigation or looking into as to what the training currently entails.
Okay. Okay. And something you mentioned on the follow-up to that, that second item, you said the current policy is to judge by appearance. Was that your interpretation of it? Is that like what's written currently in policy? Where are you pulling that from?
So in a report, yeah, I can pull it and I can get that exact language to you. I think in the case where it's explicitly around gender, like people can self-identify, but there are often times in a case where if the victim is not one to say that they believe it was motivated by any particular protected class, the officer may not have the training or knowledge around how to assess that there may have been some sort of hate crime or hate or bias motivation in the situation. So I can pull that for you.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, not completely necessary. It was just the way in which you said it made me believe that it could have been written down. It could have been your interpretation of it, and I just wanted clarity on that. Is your second item, your second recommendation, going as far as saying there needs to be a consideration that policy change to actively ask gender identity, or is it just saying brush yourself up on this particular aspect of the policy training to making sure that you're able to recognize when there might be some gender identity related hate crimes?
The latter. So it
Okay.
would be my recommendation that that within training there's a specific attention to not only when you are interacting with folks who are either transgender or non-gender conforming, but then how that translates to reporting, and in scenarios in which certain genders would be marked, and how to clarify what type of hate crime and or hate motivation it would be, because there is a lot of different combinations where something can get lost in translation, particularly for folks who are not as familiar or versed in trans equity and gender in general.
Okay. Do you, thank you for saying them. Do you have written versions of those two recommendations that we'd be able to have?
Yep.
That would be great.
Yep, I can forward those along.
Thank you so much. I have no further questions. Either Commissioner Sparks or Crockett, do either of you have questions for Ms. Gardner? Oh, Commissioner Sparks.
Hello, Ms. Gardner. First, I just want to thank you for your update and for all your work on that study and that request. We appreciate it. So I'll echo Chair Pino's comments on that. And apologies if this was covered earlier and I missed it, but is there like a required training for MPD staff on gender equity or identifying gender versus sex versus sexual orientation? A lot of workplaces have that as required training nowadays. I know that I do. I'm curious if that's something that we require at the city level or at the MPD level.
I can't speak to, or Commissioner Sparks, Chair Pino, I can't speak directly to what the training requirements. I do know that there is topics of diversity that are covered in their in-service training annually, and that would be something that we would need to look into further.
All right.
Thanks. I didn't have any further questions. Appreciate the response. And Chair Pino, maybe that's something we could add to as a to-do. We can look into what's required, what are we getting now versus what we could be getting.
Yep, that sounds good to me. Any further questions? All right, hearing none, we will excuse you, Ms. Gardner. Thank you so much for giving us the update in your report. And as soon as we get those written recommendations from you, we'll have the torch passed back on to us, and we will issue recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you.
Right. Next item of business will be unfinished business, starting with item 6, no-knock warrants research and study. And for that, I will ask if Christopher Brand would be able to hop on screen. From what I have read up on our previous meeting and our recent conversations in the larger committee, Mr. Band has provided a synopsis and summary data given his analysis of no-knock warrants compared to announced warrants. I wasn't here for that, but wanted to say thank you for the initial release of that. I have taken a look at it. Wondering if you have anything else to report, either updates to that initial report and give us kind of like a, I guess a brief of any work that's happened between the last subcommittee meeting and this one.
Yeah, so when that exploratory data was provided, the subcommittee was invited to think about any policy recommendations that you would want to make based on that exploratory data, the previous rubric that was completed, and then the previous comparison between different jurisdictions that was completed. Of course, during the interim period, we've had the tragic loss of life of Amir Locke. And since then, there is a special review going on with a detailed analysis of what has happened and other areas of policy is being looked into there. As far as that goes, there is currently a moratorium in effect when it comes to no-knock warrants. We had talked about some of the issues that it came to when it came to pulling the previous data, particularly when it came to getting copies of warrants through the court process. If you have any policy thoughts based on that previous data, I'd invite you to of course discuss them. But the ideas that I had was to support the moratorium while any further reviews are going on, and support any work when it comes to transparency and making it easier for the data to be analyzed and for more data to be public, particularly when it comes to access to search warrants and public dashboards.
Well, thank you. I mean, initially, I want to say I personally agree with both of those efforts of support, both in the moratorium, and I think it's been very clear since we've been referred to this. We have had concerns about the limited amount of public data that has been available to us in both city and county level data, which you have dug through. Thank you so much for the work that you have been able to pull from that. So I think that is important to, I'd be happy to say that we could put together even just a quick statement of saying we're supporting the moratorium and data publicity regarding no-knock warrants. On the summary information you provided itself, let me see if I can pull that up, and if it's possible, Madam Clerk, if we could pull it up for members of the public who might be watching this on YouTube later. High-risk warrant entry draft report, that's what it's titled, right? Gonna put this in the chat so that way we can just have another look at it, making sure that we're all on the same page. That is not something that I want. Okay.
Are you able to see this, Commissioner Pino?
I am. Thank you so much. That way I don't have to try to put it in the chat. I will save you guys the going through the introduction and the methodology, because I'm sure you guys already did that and I'm already aware of it. So let's just jump right into the table. Okay, results regarding table 1. If you don't mind scrolling up just a little bit so that way we can see results. Perfect. Just so that way I can kind of skim. So to put bluntly, we're wondering whether or not no-knock warrants there are different results regarding unannounced versus announced warrants as it's being described here in the results, right? And to my understanding, the methodology that you used right here, we're pulling simple averages. This is all summary data. We're not doing any sort of like parametric analysis of like linear regressions or anything like that to have like meaningful like statistical differences. This is just looking at summary data right now. Is that correct, Mr. Ban?
Yeah, so it's a random sampling from those quarters.
Okay, sounds good. And do you mind giving me just a quick understanding of why random sampling is a better methodology than just looking at the percentages of like the entirety of those data sets?
I mean, I suppose the shortest answer would be it's not better than looking at the entire data set.
Mm-hmm.
The random sampling is because this involves a lot of manual review. There isn't a way to pull all the data that can be aggregated into the percentages immediately. It's a lot of manual review.
Gotcha. Okay. So looking at it from that perspective, take it with a grain of salt, but this is the most efficient way that we could get as reliable data as we could. Is that what we're saying here? Yeah.
So it was randomly sampled from the quarters, just as a way to get the aggregate data in a way that was manageable.
Okay, sounds good. Table 1 below contains information regarding the location of high-risk warrant entry calls, both announced and unannounced. And this is a table that's broken down both by precinct, year, and announced and unannounced warrants. And I mean, just doing some quick mental math here, it does look like we don't have kind of a uniform distribution or I guess homogeneity regarding the precincts. It looks like there are some precincts that are more active just generally than others. Is that an appropriate interpretation of my eyeballing of this first table?
I would certainly agree with that.
Okay.
There are of course differences between the precincts in the number of residential properties, but then also there are of course demographic differences between the precincts. That is something that would be of interest when it comes to the distribution between the search warrants.
Okay. Yep. Between in terms of precincts themselves, for both announced and unannounced warrants, were there, and again, we can't say that there are meaningful differences, but at least eyeballing some of these numbers, were there noticeable differences between these statistics that particularly jumped out to you?
Sorry, could you repeat that question?
So the whole crux of all of this is announced versus unannounced warrants. Are there, and I'm trying really hard not to say meaningful differences, and I know that this is something that is kind of nuanced, and members of the public who are looking at these numbers and saying, Jackson, why don't you understand? These are meaningful differences. Look at the difference in the numbers. Unfortunately, the way statistics works, no, you can't define that off of this table that you have here. But in lieu of saying the word meaningful, are there noticeable differences between announced and unannounced warrants within precincts, Mr. Band, that you think are at least, rough look at these numbers that you think would merit that sort of idea that there could be meaningful differences between announced and unannounced warrants that would merit a more detailed review?
So I would certainly say that looking at comparing both categories of search warrants in quarter one of 2020 with quarter one of 2021, it appears more search warrants are being done in the 4th precinct than any other precinct in Minneapolis.
Yep.
The jump in announced in quarter one of 2020 to quarter one 2021 is a little bit surprising. The distribution,
announced, right?
Yes, the distribution moves from around a quarter to closer to a half. That I have no explanation for that. So going to something of interest, then I would categorize that as something of interest. But the distribution does seem to be overwhelmingly towards the 4th precinct.
Yep. Okay. I'm just I'm now just kind of taking a look more deeply at the numbers and seeing if I can pull some sort of like initial thoughts together while I'm doing that. Commissioners Crockett or Sparks, do you have questions regarding table 1 here specifically? And if this is review for you guys, I apologize. I just want to make sure I'm on the same page.
Hey, Chris, thanks for putting this together again. Quick question, and I'm sure it's probably detailed in there, but for the non-Minneapolis, is that just like surrounding suburbs, or is that like Hennepin County specific, or?
So it's that hasn't been broken down, but it would be any time a Minneapolis investigator has a warrant that is executed outside of the city limits.
Okay, so it could be Hennepin. Like, I guess the question is, it Hennepin County specific, or it just could be like anywhere almost?
In theory, it could be anywhere. My guess would be it would generally speaking be neighboring suburbs or possibly St. Paul. It wouldn't be restricted to Hennepin County, if that's the question.
Okay.
Okay. Another question. I know just generally across these 3 tables, we're getting a good understanding of where these search warrants are happening, both announced and unannounced by table 1. We're getting a beginning of an understanding of why these search warrants are taking place through table 2. And then table 3, if you don't mind scrolling down just a little bit more, thank you. We're talking about 3 metrics within this table that I think we're starting to get towards that all-important question that we're trying to get to, right? Is there a difference in impact? Was that the initial aim with this table 3, Chris?
I don't recall that was specifically an aim, but I know that some of the questions that had come up was to do with the target of the warrant being present and the evidence recovery rate. There isn't a huge difference in the evidence recovery rate. The target of the warrant being present is slightly lower in announced search warrants. Yeah, and then night capped isn't that isn't entirely surprising in that, nightcap, that is a special requirement. When the warrant is applied for, there needs to be a justification for it. They would often be paired with a request for that to be executed by no knock at the same time as nightcap.
Yeah, it's interesting to see that Q1 2020 announced warrants, 31% of those based off of this sample were night-capped. Is that a surprising metric? I know it's limited data, but given your interpretation of what you just said, is that a surprising figure that it's that high for that quarter?
I wouldn't say surprising in and of itself. I guess something that I would have a question about would be why it has gone down to 0 in the sample for Q1 of 2021.
Okay. I think this is great. It gives me personally a better understanding of just generally where we're going with this. And I want to acknowledge the concern of expediency, especially regarding.
Nick, sorry, I wanted to restart it.
Oh, we are. Does anyone else hear another voice, or is that just me?
Sorry, I thought I was on mute. I'll fix that. Sorry.
No worries. So this is a great first step in beginning to understand this. And again, regarding the concern for expediency, specifically, in the wake of Amir Locke's death, I want to just personally say, I want to get this information out here as soon as possible. But I also don't want the information and the analysis coming from this committee to be so quick that it ends up being inaccurate in any way. And to that extent, I'm glad that this kind of information, the summary data, is public. Next steps that I would love to dive in, and I'd be more than happy to help with developing this, Chris, is taking the exact same data that we have right here and doing just some simple linear regression analysis with the main concern being announced versus unannounced warrants, and seeing if there is a likelihood that more or less evidence is recovered in one or the other, or the target of the warrant is present in one or the other, and getting some, even if it's just initial crude understandings of those differences, and then we can start tweaking and getting those differences more refined. That would be that next step that I would like to see in terms of an evaluation with this. And I don't think I have any questions because this information speaks for itself, apart from a few of those clarifying questions that I initially had. Any questions from commissioners regarding either the rest of this statement or the rest of this report or next steps, either agreeing with or, if by all means, if you feel like there are a different path that we can go down, feel free to voice it.
Yes, Commissioner Sparks, I just want to say that I agree with the next steps.
Okay.
I do as well. Be clear.
Cool. Well, I really appreciate it. Making sure that we're not just doing timely work, but we're trying to make sure that this is done in a meaningful way. Chris, off the top of your head, how many data points do you have of both collectively announced and unannounced? Was it 24, something like that? For some reason, that number is stuck in my head.
Yeah, I believe
31.
that is the correct number.
31 in Q1. That's what I have written down here.
Q1 is 30 announced, 30 unannounced, 13 announced.
Okay.
And then, sorry, yeah, that's Q1 of 2020, and then Q1 of 2021 is 24 unannounced,
Yeah.
7 announced.
Is this all in an Excel file? Or is this still in some other data set?
I believe it is. I would have to check in with our analyst who put that together.
Yeah, if at some point you could send me the raw data file in an Excel spreadsheet, I'll play around with it. I know I said that last time and I looked at it and I didn't get back to you, but I'm doing it this time. And because now all the data's there and it's collected, and I'll be able to just highlight a few things, make a few functions, and then we'll have some very first draft numbers of impact differences. And it'll be something that is off your plate and onto mine. And so I'll be owning that.
Okay, sounds good.
All right. Any further discussion regarding no knock warrants, research and study? Okay, thank you very much, Christopher. I'm gonna hop back to my script here and say that the next item of unfinished business is coaching. And with that, I do believe we have Andrew Hawkins that is with us, who is able to give us a quick update regarding the coaching dashboard, if there has been one. And here he is.
Hey, everybody. Yeah, I'm happy to address it. So I know that the dashboard that we had looked at a while back, as we were trying to figure out the feasibility of implementing it in kind of like an updated capacity. I think it runs through 2017. I had a chance to connect with the person who actually built it back when it was done. And one of the things that I found out, and it's actually something that I think Cassidy covered when she was talking as well, it's just like some of these, the way that some of these systems are set up is they're antiquated enough that it makes pulling individual data points incredibly, incredibly hard. And so with the database that exists right now, that was done for, I can't remember if it's 2015 through 2017. It's not plugged in. It's a standalone thing. Where the analysts went into each individual file and pulled out the actual documentation and then made their own, I guess, spreadsheet, or for lack of a better term, that's what feeds the database itself. Because I think the initial hope was that we'd be able to pull it straight out of like our systems of record, but because a lot of it is just in the individual documentation, it's not possible. We are in the process, or OPCR is in the process of moving to a new system for case management, and that's one of the things that I've flagged is like, please, if you can do nothing else, give us the ability to break this stuff out. It's for similar reasons to what Cassidy had said. Is that it's one of those where things are stored properly. I mean, if the document it's done, it's signed, it's filled out, it's with the case file, and that checks a box. But from our side, when you want to know more about it, I mean, it just, it makes it impossible without going through, case by case and, finding the documentation and taking each individual thing out and putting it into its own system of records. So, yeah, so that one, there's not a ton of updates, because it basically what was found out is that, the way that it was working wasn't exactly what we were kind of hoping. And so as far as transferability, it's like the same process would have to happen.
Okay. Well, thank you for digging into that. I appreciate it. Sorry to hear that it is as similar as pulling teeth, I would assume. And it does absolutely kind of put a roadblock into the whole point of this, I think, is what we were trying to do was, have an understanding of what sort of impact does that whole coaching label have. Right. And I get that that's a hot button issue that we have touched on numerous times throughout the existence of the PCOC. Is coaching discipline? Is coaching not discipline? How does coaching have an impact on people's propensity to, have more violations or less violations? Is it helpful or not? Right. And I still think that is something that we can do. It's just understanding where those roadblocks are. And if nothing else, like what you're saying, have an understanding to what we need to accomplish in order to fix the systems that are currently in place in order to get the information that we need. So that way we can use that information to do the analysis that we're all here to do. And I know a big portion of this is public versus not public data. So let me ask you, are we, and by we, I mean Jordan Crockett, Jordan Sparks, and myself, able to look at that background data set? Yes, you have the dashboard. You have that data set that you say the people who made the dashboard, they literally plugged and chugged, they manually put it in themselves, but they put that data in from reports. Those reports, are they publicly accessible or not?
For what was used to create that, in order to make something that's able to be put public, I mean, it would have pulled from a number of like case files and like information that wouldn't be public.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
It does, which is concerning because I'm trying to think about how can we as an audit committee be helpful in accomplishing this shared goal of automating data output? Because it is very clear that there is some data that is publicly accessible, that are these little nuggets of gold kind of embedded within a larger document that is not public. And we have no way of, it seems we have no way of helping facilitate the extraction of that data without having access to the whole report, which by construction we don't have access to. Is there someone within OPCR that we can work through that would be able to have access to that data? And I guess first things first, I mean, maybe it's just a simple question. These reports, are they just PDF reports and you have to like visually look at them and then type it, like hard type it into an Excel spreadsheet? Or is it, something that can be pulled through coding of some sort and then put into, Excel workbooks or some sort of program? So that way, then that information can be, the public information can be extracted from the non-public information in a time-efficient manner. What sort of system are we looking at here?
That one I'd have to double check with staff on what's in the specific case files, but my guess is, especially even just going back to 2017, is that a lot of it's PDF and I think they're, handwritten, documentation. Okay. So it's something where like a clean, like to do a super easy clean pull on like the automation side is not in the realm of possibility. I was going to say, I think Caroline actually has her hand up, so if she wants to jump in.
Please.
Yes, hi. I'd be happy to answer that. Unfortunately, yes, it is a written PDF that is sent from the precincts back to our office, uploaded into each individual case within our records management system. So we would have to physically go into every file, look into every single PDF when it is returned, and then manually put it into a data set. So there is no way that we could preemptively extract anything from those PDFs within the records management system that we currently have.
Okay. This is now spurring a different question, because you have now proposed something that I think is, at its core, a major failure in terms of this city, in terms of being able to communicate any form of data. If things are handwritten out like that, it's just, man, there's no data transparency that's possible with that sort of thing. Is that still the case now? We were talking about it back in 2017. I get it. There's nothing we can do about that now. Are these reports still all being handwritten, or do we have some sort of online database where people are typing in everything and there are, ways that we can digitize this easier in 2022?
It is the exact same records management system with the exact same protocol from the same PDFs. Nothing has changed from 2017 to now.
Oof. Okay. Who is in charge of and who manages that system?
Andrew, correct me if I'm wrong. The RMS that we're using is managed by IT.
Yeah, that's correct. I believe IT manages all of our systems of record, and so practice manager is the one that's used, and it's incredibly antiquated. There's a reason that there's OPCR is looking at moving to a new system in the very near future, which will be a welcome change, because from my Carolina deals with it quite a bit more, but just from my few interactions with PM, it's I think I compared it to Windows 95 once and then realized that that's probably a bad comparison because it might predate that. So it was built before data, like it's a system that was created before data visualization was anywhere near where it's at now. So it wasn't built with that in mind. So I say that to point out, like, Carolina, I don't know if you have any updates on the timeline for the new case management system, but I had mentioned before that's definitely one of the things I'd like to see. Like a pretty deliberate effort, just because again, Chair Pino had talked about it, but knowing that not all of this is public, having the ability to pull out what we can in a very easily digestible way, is something that we want to be able to do. So I think it's definitely an opportunity to call some of those things out as this as a new system's getting set up.
Yeah. Well, thank you both. And yeah, and Carolina, if you do have a sense of timeline on that, is that something we can look forward to, a different case management system this year, next year? Well, yeah.
Yeah, we've had some talks with a new company that would be in charge of that RMS. It has been a few months in the making, and that will be our highest priority. We had started communications with their project manager to have more communication with OPCR within the next few weeks to at least get that started.
Okay. Yes, I have no further questions because I've hit a mental wall when it comes to this, because it now seems like it's embedded problems that's now down to something that is, IT and case management systems are not necessarily within the jurisdiction of this audit subcommittee, unless you're saying, and I want to make sure I'm clear on this. When you say IT, do you mean IT within the City of Minneapolis Department of Internet Technologies, or do you mean the IT within the Civil Rights Department or IT within Minneapolis Police Department?
It's enterprise-wide.
It's enterprise-wide. Yeah. Okay. I guess it comes down to, put simply, the recommendation that we have, that I think that we could have right now, is that civil rights and OPCR need to be provided an updated case management system that allows for the exporting and disaggregation, both aggregated and disaggregated data within that system so that way we can even start to have an understanding of the impact of coaching within the Minneapolis Police Department. That's what I the only important thing that I can think of right now. Thoughts from the commissioners regarding this? I know we went on like a big old tangent on IT now, but that seems to be where this is headed.
Yeah, it's having some deja vu over here. Data governance, data practices, antiquated systems seem to be a very common theme for the last, every one of these meetings for the last like year and a half.
Mm-hmm. But at least now we can say, hey, we need to have a letter to Enterprise IT, and if I could work with Andrew Hawkins to like format this correctly so that way it's directed to the right people, about exactly who it needs to go to, and what is actually needed to be changed specifically. I think that's the first action item that we can have on this coaching discussion, and hopefully that will help spur a quicker change so we can get the data that we need, so we can do the analysis that we want to do to actually do the substantive work that we want to do. Andrew?
Thanks, Chair Pino. I was just going to echo your point and say that this is something we're looking at across the entire department, for all of our investigative bodies, in terms of, like getting access to, more modern case management software for the same purpose. And then, again, the one thing that is unique for Minneapolis in terms of the data portal is, the amount of data that's available is still up there with, it's certainly one of the more comprehensive portals in the country. However, for that to continue and for it to continue being of value and for it to continue evolving, that's kind of, where we've hit this wall where, in lieu of, having better tools, to pull this out and to pull things out more dynamically, we're at that point where, that's where we're going to end up staying, unless something changes.
I have just another thought that I would rather not go down this route. I'd rather actually fix the problem than put a Band-Aid up. But this obviously had enough internal motivation at one point to fund someone creating that initial dashboard. Would you be able to provide us with a budgetary analysis of back in 2017 when the first dashboard was made, the costs associated with it and the time that it took, so that way next meeting, hopefully when we have those numbers, we can either we could start to have a conversation of, man, this data is outdated, we would like to see it refreshed in due time. When we're able to have it refreshed, what would the costs look like? Who's going to pay for that? What would the time frame look like?
Sure. Yeah, I'd be happy to get something back to you.
That would be great. And I will send you an email later this week regarding that IT request. That way we frame it appropriately. Hold on, let me just write down that that Andrew Hawkins budget info on coaching dashboard. Okay. Any other questions or comments regarding the unfinished business item coaching? None? Okay. With that, we'll move on to a continued discussion regarding the arbitration research and study. I do believe it was not last meeting of the subcommittee, but it was the meeting back in January that in my absence, the subcommittee had Joel Fussy in to give us an understanding of our scope, but his perspective on the caution that he wants us to have regarding the evaluation of arbitrations. Upon reviewing the video from that, he ended up mentioning that HR attorneys that he works with, colleagues of his in the city attorney's office, handle that. And I'm not sure if he specifically meant, and I would, is Joel here? No. I wish I could have been there to ask if he meant handled the arbitration itself, which would make sense. But also it was framed in such a way that it made me think that these HR attorneys handle the evaluation of the arbitration process. And I guess to just kick things off, is that what, I mean, if that rattled your memory a little bit, fellow commissioners, is that what he was saying, that, we're able to look into policing matters in the change, policing policies and practices, but not necessarily the arbitration process, because HR attorneys in the city attorney's office handle that? Am I correct in my interpretation of that?
That's how I interpreted it.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what was the end result of that conversation from your guys' perspectives? How did that conversation end? And what did you believe would be potential next steps from that?
I seem to recall Mr. Fussy indicating that it might be possible to meet with some of those attorneys to discuss that further. I think he might have offered, actually, and I told him to hold off until we had a chance to regroup, because I wanted to make sure that we're staying in scope. There's a disagreement on scope, right? Some of us think that our scope is larger than other people think. It's up to interpretation. My feeling is that we should be able to look at and study all kinds of things. So I'd be interested, at least in the conversation, and it would be maybe good information for the public too, in kind of how that process works and how the city attorney's office is involved. But I don't know what my fellow commissioners think.
Jordan Crockett, do you have any thoughts?
Nothing outside of what Commissioner Sparks and what you kind of mentioned. I just remember Attorney Fussy just kind of reiterating that we would be out of our scope to analyze the arbitration piece.
Yeah. And if, I'm not a lawyer, and I'm not going to go into the, trying to interpret whether or not things are within or outside of our scope of authority. And I think we can go down one of two routes, just kind of externalizing here. One, I think it'd be totally fine to have a conversation with the HR attorneys. And as long as that conversation centers around the concept of how this impacts the process of the officers themselves and the accountability of the officers themselves, because off of the lists of 10, give or take, items that are within our authority that Mr. Fussy referred to, I think it's just important for us to have that sort of conversation of, okay, if we're going to talk to some HR attorneys, let's talk to them and have an understanding of their process of evaluating arbitration and how that type of arbitration has an impact on, the accountability of officers, for instance. The second thing that I think that we could do either apart from or following that conversation with HR attorneys would be if we clearly understand that this is outside of our scope, that arbitration evaluation is not within our jurisdiction. We could at least put together a list of proposed questions and send them off to the appropriate auditor of that process, saying, hey, we noticed that there are some lingering questions regarding the arbitration process and how it impacts the accountability of police officers. Here are some questions that we are interested in, and as the appropriate auditing authority, we would like you to look into it. People do that to us regularly. We should be able to do that to the appropriate auditing group for arbitration. Okay, I'm seeing general head nods. That's a good thing. And so, I mean, with that in mind, would the clerk please reach out to Mr. Fussy so that way we could take him up on his offer to ask some questions of some HR attorneys on the topic of arbitration, the evaluation of the arbitration process and its impact on police officer accountability.
I will certainly reach out to him and CC you on that.
Thank you very much. Any further questions? Because I feel like the ball's now out of our hands. But if there isn't, please let me know. Cool. I'm seeing a thumbs up and a head nod. Moving on. Final order of unfinished business, discipline, research, and study. This was something, last time I remember having this conversation, we had this initially in November, right? And we were talking about setting initial parameters of different metrics that we were interested in looking at and seeing whether or not those different metrics have, any impact on someone's likelihood to either commit some sort of violation as a police officer, and then following up the extent of their discipline, if there is discipline. And I think that this is just, again, not splitting hairs here. There's a meaningful difference here between discipline and coaching. We're going off of the initial idea right now that this is for officers who receive discipline, which will not include coaching, i.e. more public data, because once it's discipline, it's more public. And that's where we kind of left things, this initial idea of like, hey, we want to look at this series of metrics, the violations themselves, the demographics of both the officer and the person who filled out the complaint, the years of service and age, in particular, precinct, which I believe Commissioner Crockett, you were talking about location based metrics that would be interesting. Any previous history of violations, like the number of violations, whether or not they're similar to the current violation, the location of the interaction itself, the whether or not that what Chief Arredondo's response was based off of the recommendation or previous violations, whether or not one, take two very similar violations, do they get the same or different disciplines and why, essentially. And then timeline, the amount of time it takes to get from the complainant filling out the complaint to OPCR and the panel having their review and determination of merit. And then another timeline from merit to the discipline being rendered. That's all I have here in my notes. What else have you guys had conversations about in January regarding this? Has there been any movement? I don't think we have like a lingering ask out there. We kind of just acknowledge like, here was our wish list.
Yeah, and I feel like, I can't remember if it was Fussy or somebody else, but I feel like we were told we're basically not going to get it. A lot of that information is privileged, and it's not going to happen. But my memory is a little hazy.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting, because I guess since we have, we do have Carolina Amini, if you're still on, would you mind if I cold call on you for a second? I'll be kind, I promise.
That was a lot of questions. If you could repeat some of them, and of course.
So.
Oh,
yeah. The first thing, I guess, put simply, what information, when it comes to discipline, once something has been given merit of discipline, what is public?
I think that Andrew might be able to answer that a little bit better than I can. I believe the final document published by the chief, and the types of discipline as well. Andrew, I think you would be better to answer that one.
I didn't see Andrew. I think he ended up leaving. I know he was crunched for time.
Okay. Sure.
But yeah, I mean, you heard me rattle off a whole list of things, and there have been things that we've been kind of begging for years now, and I know that's some of the stuff. It melds into that whole conversation of the last time you were talking with us a few minutes ago about data release. Are any of those things off the top of your head, like what the violation is? Even think about like the case summary reports that we put in, like some of that data is publicly available, right? Like not the names of the officers, but like, what the officer did, and what the recommendation was, right?
Yes, because we, like you had mentioned, we do put that in the case summaries of the types of violation, whether it was an A through D, and what they had received at the end. If we are able to release that, that should be available.
Mm-hmm. And that's the kind of stuff that I'm looking for. Is just like being able to say, like, if it's a Class A violation, right, and it's got merit of discipline. And could you, randomly off the top of your head, could you tell me what an example of a Class A violation would be?
Sure. Well, for a BWC activation specifically, if it's an officer that had gone to a scene and didn't activate their body-worn camera on time, for example, that is their first violation, BWC violation within that year. Yes, that could be considered an A violation.
Okay, and see, that's the kind of thing where, like, I'm really interested in, for instance, I know you guys get a lot of BWC violations, and I would love to be able to look at, all of the public available information of those BWC violations over the course of whenever the new policy came in, 2020, from 2020 to 2022, looking at all the BWC violations, and then seeing, I'm sure the vast majority of them, the panel that said they had merit, that ended up being an A-level violation. But I'm sure not all of them were. Maybe some might have been a B or a C-level violation. I think it would be very interesting, especially in regards to the consistency of discipline, to be able to look at an analysis of all of those body-worn camera violations and see whether or not there's reasons behind some of the ones that, who ended up getting B or C level disciplines, or labeled as a B or C level violation, getting a harsher discipline. Was it because of meaningful things in the way in which they violated body-worn camera policy, or were there other things that just, it doesn't make sense? And pulling out that type of understanding in the trends, I think, will be super useful for us, not just in terms of like BWC, but moving violations, or engaging with certain demographics of people over others. It could be a rich data set that, if we get that case management update, we'll be able to pull this a lot more easily. But I think even without that, it's possible for you to pull some of this stuff now. So that means that the information is out there, and it's just figuring out what information is applicable to us that we can use in a meaningful way. And I'm done ranting. I see Chris Band, you have your hand raised.
And I also want to say, just to specify between a BWCA violation and a BWC, B, C, or D, like I had mentioned, if it was that officer's first misactivation within that year, it could be considered an A.
Sure.
If they've had 2, 3, or more, it could be a B, C, or D. Or like you had mentioned, if something, and I'm speaking just out of generality, just an example, if an officer deactivates their camera prematurely during an important part of the scene, or has a history of activating and deactivating inconsistent with policy, yes, that could also be an example of a BC. I just wanted to put that up there.
And I think that that's important stuff to know, and looking at that, not just, like you got so much information that's in your head because you've been able to look at this stuff, right? I want to be able to, in a publicly available way, take that information out and put it on paper and make it visible for the public to kind of see, like, oh, this is what it means, So thank you. I really appreciate that. Chris, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, so I think because there are some questions about the feasibility of the study and maybe how it would look, it'd be good just to, I'm just linking to the research study and process. Maybe you want to meet with an OPCR analyst and go through a project formulation, an initial survey to see what data would be available and what questions could be answered before going into a full study. So I've linked to that process, and that would kind of go through the viability of doing a full study.
Yeah. Okay. I think that that's something we can definitely do. Thank you, Chris, for that. I'm gonna, I guess while I'm writing that down, any questions or comments from commissioners regarding currently where we're at in this discipline study? Nothing. You guys are just leaving me out to dry while I quietly write notes. It's fine.
Yeah, I just want to see you sweat a little bit. No, I don't have any questions, commentary over here.
Okay. Let's. Carolina, You don't have to come back on camera if you don't want. But since Chris mentioned it, is that something that you would be able or would have the capacity to be able to do with us next month? Is give us an understanding of what is publicly available and the kind of weighing that, what is possible versus what is time efficient and not going to like completely consume someone's job to get the type of data that we're looking for.
Yeah, I can definitely check in next month with that information.
Cool. I really appreciate that. And just so that way it is helpful for you, I am going to type out the list of metrics that we were interested in so you can copy and paste them. I will say them out loud for members of the public who don't have access to this chat. The violation of the officer itself, that grade that you were talking about, A through D, violation grade, and I know some of these are just not going to be possible, but I'm putting them all in there. Demo graphics, of the officer and complainant. Officer years of service, age of the officer in particular, precinct of the officer, the precinct of the incident, the number of previous violations by the officer, the time from complaint to panel merit decision, if that makes sense, and the time from panel merit decision to MPD implement. As well as any attempt to. That's all I had. Any commissioners, do we have any of the other commissioners think of a metric that would be important that isn't listed there? You're welcome to put them in the chat if you can think of one. That was all I had. And thank you again, Caroline, for that.
Yeah, I don't have any to add. I think that you captured everything. I think it's a good wish list. It would be really nice if we could get all this, or even some of it.
For some reason, the chat's being funky for me and it won't let me see all of them. But I assume, Carolina, were you able to highlight and copy and paste all of those?
Yeah, I see them in the chat.
Okay, cool. Thank you. And we look forward to chatting with you next month. Any other final words on the discipline research and study for today, commissioners? None. All right. Well, with that, we've concluded all items on our agenda for this meeting. Seeing no further business before us and without objection, I will declare this meeting adjourned. Thank you for everyone who participated and